Welcome to the Harvest Podcast, a missions podcast of Harmony Hill Baptist Church. We're doing a limited series focus on our Niger mission trip from 2023. I'm Todd Core, lead pastor here at Harmony Hill, and today I'm joined by Traci Hall and Dylan Sandlin. They were both on the trip, and if you would, Dylan, just briefly share what your role on the trip here at the church, and how long you've been a part of Harmony Hill.
Gotcha. Yeah, so I've been a part of Harmony Hill since birth. All right, me and you worked together in youth for, 7, 8 years, something like that. Worked with Traci for the last, 3 or 4 years now?
3.
3 years now. For the Niger trip, my role was just kind of to help Traci and Ross both lead out in this trip, plan this trip, help students find opportunities to spread the word, help debrief, be there for students with questions. I believe this was my 5th trip to Niger, so a little familiar with the area. But yeah, that was kind of my role, just working together as on the leadership team as far as the trip goes.
Very good. And now you are our middle school minister, which sort of developed after the trip to Niger.
Yeah.
So very good. Traci, a little bit about yourself. Same stuff.
Yeah, I am the girls ministry associate. Been here for 3 years. On the trip, same as Ross and Dylan, just leadership support, coming alongside the students. A little bit of mission trip mom, maybe. But yeah, just support.
Very good. All right, so I want to take us back to a little bit before we actually went on the trip. Dylan, you just mentioned that you had made several trips before, sometimes as an individual. You'd actually been with a couple of students previous, but going into this particular trip, what was your mindset? What were you, before you actually left to go on the trip, what were you hoping to see as somebody who'd been before and taking students?
All right, so this trip was actually a lot different. And so leading up to the trip, in all honesty, was kind of, I'm going to say there was disappointment in the trip, but I knew that it would be a lot different because previous trips I'd been on, we had gone out to the bush and done evangelism ministry in the bush. And so this trip was a lot different. Can't really go out safely into the bush. So this was going to be a trip done in the city. So for me, I was trying to prepare for something that was a lot different than normal. Well, just fast forward, reality was it wasn't completely different. There was still a lot of the same aspects, but one of the things that I was really hoping for these students was that they would really get the opportunity to see what true lostness is like. So we live in the States. Not everybody's a believer. Not everybody is saved, but the sense of lostness when you're in Niger is really strong, and it's really a dark place that you can really sense darkness and lostness. And so I was really hoping that a lot of our students would really grasp the fact of, okay, now I know what lostness can be like, away from home, because, you get so used to the culture that you live in, and you see the switch of, in a student's head of like, oh, this is why we actually do missions. This is why we care about people around the world, or we give financially, or people will move across the world because they learn of the true feeling of lostness and darkness in something like Niger or a third world country like that.
Yeah. So Dylan had some experience in this particular country, and I know you've been on overseas mission trips before, but you had never been to Niger. And so Traci, walk me through just personally what was going through your mind as you were getting ready to go on this trip.
Personally?
Yeah, personally.
Yeah. It was a little different. It was it's not my first trip I went with kids. I have 2 daughters at home, and so while I was praying and preparing for the trip, I just kept thinking I needed to prepare all of their school things in advance before we left. And thankfully I did. Because it needed to be done before we left. And so that was just a personal thing in preparation. That was my only focus, is like, I need to make sure my kids are taken care of before I leave. And then just the same that Dylan said for the students too.
What was it for you, Traci, that, again, now you've been there, you've seen it, what did you sort of have in your mind Niamey would be like, or Niger would be like before you went? What was sort of the picture of what it would be like?
I mean, I've been to India a couple of times, and so that's just what I pictured. And it's not far from, there's more people in India, but it's pretty close to the same thing. So
Yeah.
that's what I pictured.
For people who've never been, maybe even outside of the United States, but certainly to Niamey or Niger, Dylan, just give me a brief sort of description of what it's like even just driving through town, what you're seeing that is just so different there than it is even here.
Okay. Yeah. So the things that kind of come to mind if you're just driving through Niamey, first thing, unfortunately, is there's trash everywhere. So there's not like, people that come clean the streets up. So one, thinking about there's trash. One, it's on the edge of the Sahara Desert. So there's literally dirt everywhere. Like you think of movies and how there's kind of just dirt all over the place. That's what this is like. So if a dust storm comes through, the road might be covered in dirt. There's pavement under there somewhere. I mean, there's brick fences around everybody's house with gates and spikes. There's guards around these houses that are paid to make sure people aren't going. And there's donkeys pulling carts that are just made out of sticks and they have hay stacked on them 15 foot tall, but one donkey pulling it. Like, it's pretty wild. See camels rolling through town. All kinds of stuff. There's motorcycles everywhere. Traffic laws don't exist. You kind of go where you want, when you want. And the horn is like a second language. So, over here, the horn's like someone's mad at you. Over there, it's like, what's up? I'm here. Beep, beep. So that's kind of some things. There's not a lot of trees, or there's no grass. It's just kind of barren, I guess you'd say.
Traci, anything you would add to that? Things that stuck out to you just as you drove through the city or walked through the city?
No, I covered it pretty well.
Yeah. It's amazing to me that no traffic laws is unbelievable. I remember being, when I was there, just on the edge of my seat, how are we going to get through this intersection where it's just you force your way in to everywhere, and then just seeing all the people on the side of the road just then selling things like bags of water. Did y'all buy any bags of water? I'm just curious because I was uninitiated in how to drink that. Did y'all have any struggle with how to drink the bag of water?
Dylan handed it to me. He's like, you just rip a hole in it and drink it. And I was like, you're pranking me right now. And he's like, no, I'm serious. And I was like, I'm just going to hold this until I see somebody else doing it. I think I poured the first one in my water bottle because I really didn't believe him. And then I saw somebody do it. And I was like, okay, maybe this is proper.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was very confused on what do I do with this little plastic bag of water. But
yeah, I almost stole a couple of those bags of water on accident. We were at a soccer tournament with our kids, and I thought this kid was handing out water that the church had paid for, and I was like, yeah, give me a couple, handing them to our students. I don't know, 45 minutes later, we're about to leave, and this kid's like chasing me down, like saying something I can't understand, and he's pointing at his water, and I was like, where are our missionaries at? 'Cause I think I stole this kid's water. But we did get it paid for, so it was all good.
There you go. Very good. So when you got there, a couple of things that you did, again, pre-coup, is you worshiped with the church, our partner church, Grace Gomney. You did soccer tournaments. You did some VBS type stuff. When you think about that part of the trip, the ministry, I'm going to ask this from a guy's perspective and then from the girl's perspective. And so I'll start with you, Dylan. From a guy's perspective of the ministry, as you look back on the ministry part of it, what like ministry wins? Where do you find like a source of pride in the students and in watching them do ministry? Like what are one or two things that just stand out from watching our high school boys doing that ministry?
Yeah, so when our boys, they started out a little bit nervous. I mean, rightfully so. It's very unfamiliar territory, and you can't speak to people. And for a lot of them, it's their first kind of trip of that magnitude. And so they started out nervous. But as far as VBS goes, the first day was slow. Ideas came slow. But then as we continued into it, the boys that I was working with in the rec and stuff, man, they started to realize, okay, it's not as much about what we're doing, and it's more about we're just building relationships with these kids in order for them to be connected to this church. And so once they kind of figured that out, they grasped that idea, and we're like, okay, we're fully invested in these kids and having fun with these kids in order for the relationship to be built, so then the church can, help them build a relationship with the Lord. We had one of our boys that this was pretty neat. So for the most part, boys are pretty much like, I want to do rec. And one of our boys, name was Ben. We're planning. Me and the other boys were planning out games and stuff. And I was like, Ben, do you have any ideas? And he was like, I think I'm gonna do something else. And he went inside and he helped with the craft with you guys, right? And so it was really interesting to see him, who is an athlete, is like on sports teams in high school. He was like, you know what? I'm not gonna really focus on what I would think would be fun and try to invest in a different way. So that was cool to see him try to expand what he was comfortable with and kind of get involved in something else that, might not be his style. And then as far as the boys go and like the soccer stuff that we were doing, it's no secret that kids can get really competitive. So we had a few of our boys that are actually soccer players, a couple of them, and other ones that really enjoy the game. And after our first game that they played, that was in an adult league, like a young men's league, our team got destroyed, basically, like to put it nicely. And they were kind of beat down over it at first, and then as they kind of went back and reflected of like, okay, we're not here to win a soccer tournament, we're here to again build relationships, and kind of pick themselves back up, and went from the attitude of like, this is kind of dumb, I don't want to play in this tournament anymore because we're not going to win, to no, let's just be here, have fun, build relationships with these people, because that's the whole point of what we're doing, is to draw these people closer to the church in order to build relationships with people who are there on the ground. So that was cool to kind of see that flip of like, okay, I can still be competitive, but I can still have a purpose in what I'm doing in these tournaments as well.
Very good. Traci, from the girls' perspective, what were some wins that you saw with our students?
Yeah. So we had 2 girls do crafts, and then 3 girls, they were leading the Bible study. And I was kind of going between them. And it was just, whenever you're in that situation, you can get so focused on, this is what I have planned. And you see in the first session that is not going to go well. And so I went to them a couple different times and gave them some tips or some pointers, or, hey, let's move this around. You got 3 minutes to figure this out before your next group comes. And they're like, okay, we can do this. We're going to make this better, And so they had like great attitudes, and they were flexible and moldable, which is a key thing in missions. And by the end of it, when we were, where did we go for that church, our last day of BBS?
It was just on the outskirts of town.
Okay, so we went to like somebody's house church. And there were a bunch of Muslim kids who've never heard the gospel at all. And by the time we got to there, like, they had a solid presentation of the gospel that those kids could hear. And I literally just sat and like cried. I'm not a crier, but I just sat and cried because like, just to see how they were open to the Lord working through them. It was really cool and really powerful to see.
That's all. So just to underscore for those that are listening or watching, our high schoolers went and personally shared the gospel with people who had never heard of Jesus or his good news of salvation. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. And did a great job.
Yeah. And that I just want to underscore that for people that may be coming to this podcast, because it is intriguing, the whole coup and those kind of things. But at the end of the day, that was what motivated this team to even go. And so in that sense, there was mission accomplished, that the gospel was proclaimed to those who have not heard. And I'm so proud of that fact. I'm so proud of you guys for leading them to do that. And so you've had a couple of days of ministry. I'm just going to ask one of you this question. Traci, I'll ask you because Dylan's been a couple of times. But from a first-timer's perspective, when you went to the church service, for people who maybe have never been a part of that, just sort of briefly describe what that service was like. Like, help us understand what happened in that service, and maybe anything that sort of stuck out to you.
Okay. Trying to remember. So, I mean, I just remember it being very warm and inviting. We had worship songs in French. Ross, our first Sunday, Ross preached the message. Our second Sunday, Mark preached. We ended with the Lord's Supper, which is pretty cool. Never had the Lord's Supper in a different language before. But I mean, it felt pretty normal. I don't remember anything out of the norm.
Describe the environment of where church takes place there.
It's like an amphitheater, outdoors with just a covering. Very basic. There's a baptism and the floor. I didn't know what it was at first. I was like, why does that water keep coming up on the floor like that? But that's where they have their baptisms. Dirt.
Yeah, always dirt. Always dirt. Yeah, so the church there has sort of a property with a multi-level building that they use for offices and things like that. But then they've got this nice amphitheater, which you described, which then you're hearing all the noises of the community, including, I don't know if this happened while y'all were there, but the Muslim call to prayer often will go off even during the midst of a gathering. And so it's really interesting to be having a worship service focused on Christ right in the middle of everyone practicing Islam. And so it's a really neat picture of what that church is doing there. So you've had chance to connect with Mark and other partners, and I know that Mark and his team, there were several families. I know y'all got close to several of those families. We'll probably talk about them in a few moments. But so you've had the day of ministry. I believe it was Wednesday, and you get back to what we call the compound. It's where y'all were staying, and all of a sudden word comes that the country has undergone a military coup. Through my hard-hitting journalism, I believe that I have discovered one of the reasons that this may have taken place. Traci, would you just describe what you were praying right in that time frame before the coup?
Yeah, my prayer was that the Lord would multiply our time there. Yeah, I should have worded it a little bit differently, I guess. What I meant was multiply our efforts.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. But he multiplied our time.
But he honored your prayer.
He did. He did. Yeah.
So this call comes in. Dylan, walk me through, how did you personally, like what took place where you found out that things had changed and that a military coup had taken place?
Yeah, so personally, at first it didn't seem like that big of a deal. I mean, a military coup, yeah, it's a big deal, but I've been familiar with Niger enough to know that it happens fairly often. I've heard Ben talk about it. I've heard Mark talk about being in them. And so when I heard that, I was like, okay, maybe we'll just leave a little sooner. Like, probably nothing bad's going to happen or anything. But then I got to thinking about, if we do stay longer. At the time, I think my son was, 9 months, 10 months old, something like that. And so at that point, he had started doing a lot of first this and first that. And so really going into the longer we were staying, that really became more of a factor of like, I'm missing my kid's life. Sure, we're only there for a couple of weeks, but in the moment, it's like, my goodness, I'm missing all this stuff. And so that's kind of personally where my head went first, is like, it started out like, okay, this probably isn't a big deal, but then flared up into like, okay, now I'm going to start missing my wife and missing my son and all this stuff. But yeah, staying an extra however many days that we ended up staying didn't really come to mind at that point. It was just kind of like okay, we're going to spend the rest of this day here. Tomorrow we'll just pick up where we left and keep going. Didn't know that Traci had asked that we would stay longer to God, but, it is what it is.
So Traci, what about you? What were the circumstances in which someone told you, hey, there's been a coup?
So I was sitting at the table with some students. We were getting ready to play a game. And Ross, the hallway that the boys were on was facing me. And Ross comes down the hallway, and the way he's walking and the look on his face, I thought someone has died. And then he does this, and I was like, oh, shoot. So we go off to the side room, and he says a coup has started, and I was relieved because nobody had died. And then I thought, well, that's not how I wanted our time to be multiplied. And then I thought about my mom, actually, because when I was 19, I went on my first mission trip, and she said, what if something happens? What if you get stuck there? What if, and I was like, well, this is the worst possible situation that she's always been afraid of. And so we'll see what happens, And so we had our little talk. He said, if we hear gunfire, we're going to get the students in the hallway, away from windows and things. And I was like, okay, this is really real. So we went back, and he's like, we're not going to tell them yet. So we went back, and we were playing this game, and I hear noise outside, and come to find out it was road noise. But in that moment, I was like, is that gunfire? I don't know. And I look at Ross, and I said, do you hear thunder? And he's like, I don't know. And he like stands up and walks to the window, and he's like looking out the window, kind of listening. And then he's like, I think it's fine. And I was like, okay. And so he sits down, and we keep playing the game. So that's how it went.
And just to be clear, did you ever actually hear or experience any gunfire?
No.
Just for the record.
Well, no. I'm just...
and what is hard, I think, even for me, but certainly for many people, would you describe? It's hard for me to understand how you guys felt so safe, because we're seeing things on the news here and all this kind of stuff. But describe what the day-to-day was like in those few days in between when the coup started and when you were able to come home. Did you feel safe? What were you doing? How were you occupying your time? Traci, why don't you?
Okay. Yes, safe for sure. I think just the Lord and his goodness, in a way, prepared me for the news, because at night I couldn't sleep. And so I just turned on the first album that was on my iPod thing on my phone. And it was Bethany Bernard. And the first song was called Feast of Your Faithfulness. And the chorus says, Jesus, you promise that you'll hold on to those you've been given. And here in this desert is my oasis, a table prepared, a feast of your faithfulness. And I went to bed every night from day one, listening to that song and going like, okay, like he's prepared something for us. And then when this happened, we're in the desert, in this oasis, because he's prepared this for us, and this is a feast of his faithfulness. And so I kind of went into it with this mindset of, if this is a feast, let me see how he's faithful. Let me see how he's going to take care of us, and how he's going to take care of our family at home, and how he's going to get us through this, and how he's going to be glorified through this. And so that was just my mindset going through the whole thing. And so I never felt unsafe, one, because there was never a reason to feel unsafe. But two, I just fully trusted that the Lord was going to take care of us, and we would get home when we needed to get home.
Wow. Dylan, talk a little bit about what you were doing. Like, what did the team do to fill their time day to day?
Yeah, so Traci sang that song for us no, I'm just kidding.
I did not.
But, no, I mean, we had a lot of fun in there. There was times that we were a little bit worried. We'd get new news, and it would kind of be like, oh, that's a bummer, or oh, we're going to have to stay longer, or our flights got canceled. And so there was times that it was kind of like, oh, man, this isn't good. Some students took that news as, oh, good, so I might not have to go to school for the first week. Well, then other students were taking that as like, I'm moving to college next week, and that's more time I don't get to spend with my family. So there was times that were like down moments, you could say. But then for the most part, I think we had fun. So that compound, I don't know how big it is. It might be a 10-acre compound. So it wasn't a small place that we're in. You know, there's a basketball court there. There's a playground and stuff. So one day we went to like a multi-purpose room and played what we called the coup games, which, you know, a lot of minute to win it type games were played. We kind of made a little fall retreat, basically.
Yeah.
Going deep
out of our youth ministry bag.
Yeah, it went really deep into Mark's youth ministry bag. Gotcha. Didn't play flame ball, which we can explain that later, but we did play a lot of fun games. And so we did that. We had a volleyball tournament, basketball tournament, all kind of stuff like that. Played a game called Sardines at night with, flashlights. And the whole time we're doing this, Mark and Parker's kids, they're doing this with us. There's another missionary family that was new to Niger. Their names are the Jessies. Their 4 kids were playing these games with us. And so we really got to connect with those kids doing that. But I mean, there was a lot of wanting to get out of there though. So we were having fun. We were coming up with things to do. But we, at the same time, with what Traci said, I mean, we felt so safe that, to be honest with you, you were kind of annoying because you wouldn't let us leave the compound, right? No, Todd was.
He's pointing at me.
It's Todd because Ross is telling us like, no, Todd says we're still on level 2. We can't leave until we're level 1. And we're like, Todd, we're fine. Like, let us go out into the public and do something. So there was a little bit of that, like, we felt safe enough to where we were thinking, let us just go to the Jesse's house, work on their house, or let us just go finish this soccer tournament or do this VBS, which obviously y'all were making the correct calls and we were just wanting to get out. But at the same time, we were doing a study through Philippians, asking God to use our time to do something for his kingdom. And so we're constantly searching on ways to get out of this compound to do God's work when really, man, God was working on us. He was working on the Phillips. He was working on the Jesse's family and working on us all together. And so, to second what Traci said, we were safe.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. And we had fun. Not that there wasn't down times or hard times.
It's expected.
Yeah. I mean, we had fun together and we grew as a team and we grew in our relationships with the Lord.
So let me piggyback on just one thing you just said, where God was working on you in that time. Looking back, what do you feel like was? I know there's probably multiple layers to this, but what's one thing that sort of comes to the top where you go, man, I think God was really showing me this or teaching me this? What, as you reflect back on especially that in between the coup and when you left, what sort of comes to mind? And whoever's ready can jump on that.
I'll say this. I learned a lot of leadership lessons in this trip. We've done a lot of trips together. I've had the opportunity to lead a lot of stuff, but this specifically in something that's not going in an ideal fashion. I'm kind of in my head learning to lead in a way that's separate than how I'm personally feeling, because I didn't share with a ton of people, but I was really, really, really wanting to go home. Like, I know for a lot of people, we're like, it's fine. Let's just do what we can do while we're here. For me personally, I really wanted to get home, and it was all stemming from having not an infant, but fairly close to an infant at home. That I'm like, I want to get home to watch him crawl for the first, like that kind of stuff. And so I was having to really balance me wanting to be mopey and sad and like just rest. I'm like, I just really want to go home. I don't want to deal with these kids. I don't want to, talk to these people, like just being honest with you. And so I was having to honestly shove that stuff down and be present with our students and play games with our students. I'm like, I love playing basketball. I don't want to play a basketball tournament when it's 105 outside and I can't leave this place. Like, but, part of our job was to be there, mentally, emotionally, to support those students. And so, that's something that I learned. That's something that God had to help me through, because like I said, I wanted to be like, I don't want to do anything because I want to go home. Because it felt like to me like our trip got shut down. Well then, through the students and their energy and their wanting to dig in the Word and their just like, let's use this opportunity for something positive. That taught me and rubbed off on me in a way towards the end of the week. I was like, you know what? Y'all are right. Like, let's dive into it. And a lot of that was led through through Traci and Ross as well. But, their willingness and their attitude to say, let's just actually dive into this, taught me something in leadership through watching them.
Amen. That's awesome. Traci, what about you?
Yeah. There's a whole lot, but just first thought is I am a big picture person. I like a plan. I like to know where we're going. I like to know when it's going to end. And I really had to learn to take it day by day and trust the Lord today, trust the Lord in this hour. And while I'm doing that, also encourage these girls and build them up and point them back to the Lord, and use scripture and say, God, I don't know that I have one right now. Can you give me one? They need something. They need you. And so just day by day, there's a quote by Andrew Murray, and it says, like, can you abide in the Lord today? Can you trust the Lord today to keep you faithful today? And that's just what I kept thinking is, can I be faithful today? And not worry about 10 days from now or tomorrow, but today. And so that's the biggest takeaway right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, you have the option to either be mopey or to say, God, I'm going to trust you with today and whatever's coming today. And there's probably not been a time, I would imagine, more focused on that in your lives than being sort of imprisoned in an area where you have no control. And so, man, I'm just so proud of you guys and thankful that you were there and that you were able to be faithful to the Lord and to encourage these students. And it doesn't surprise me at all that they encouraged you back. I mean, as an incredible group of students. So we're talking with various groups about different things of this trip, and so I want to sort of wind it down. The day in which you actually leave, there was zero indication on anyone's side that this was going to be the day that you were going to leave. I believe, Traci, you had said that it would be the worst case scenario to just have to basically walk in and you got 30 minutes to get out of here. And that's pretty much what happened. So describe, as we've had one of the podcasts that we've done is with Mark and Ross and talking about how some of that comes together and from their perspective. But describe to me what's happening in the compound like right before, and then what happens when you get the word it's time to go. So Dylan, what were you doing just right in the moments leading right up to this?
So that was the day we did our volleyball tournament, and we had finished up like 30 minutes before that. And so we're waiting our turns to get cleaned up. That turn never came for me. But while waiting, I think all the boys were in my room, and me and Ross were in my room. Ross was actually plotting a prank on somebody. We won't go into the details of that prank, but he was plotting a prank. He left to go set up said prank, and the next time he came back in, he was with Mark, and Mark is saying, pack your stuff up, you're leaving in less than 10 minutes. And I was like, oh, snap. Well, Ross he'd kind of briefed me and Traci on, hey, we might leave in the next 24 hours, in the next 48 hours. So just kind of have that in your head. We didn't know it was going to be, 2 hours later that he told us that, and it was going to be right now. So we had a little bit of bearing of like, okay, this means we're actually leaving. And so I'm telling my boys like, hey, pack your stuff up. We're going home. Like, let's go. We don't have time. And they keep saying, what's happening? What's happening? I'm like, nothing's happening. Just pack your stuff so we can go. And they're like, but something must have happened for us to like be getting out of here so quick. And I'm like, no, guys, just pack your stuff and let's go. And then more questions and more questions. And so finally they're like, okay, we just need to pack our stuff. So we pack our stuff. One of our boys, man, all of his clothes were in the washing machine. And so sopping wet clothes just stuffed into the suitcase and, made our way through all the different stops from that point. But yeah, that was kind of what we were doing. I was waiting on Ross to
do a prank.
And the funny thing is when we landed later in Rome, he did, like, first thing he said was, I didn't get to finish my prank.
Regrets. We've all got them.
Regrets. But that's kind of what we were doing in that room.
Traci, what about you?
So actually I was at KK's house, one of the missionaries there. Grant and Rivers were needing to use her hotspot to work on college stuff, and so I was up there with them. While we were there, we started to pack up her house in case she had to leave. And then she said, actually, it's too much. I can't do this. And so we stopped. And I was just hanging out while the boys were there. So at 5-10 minutes before, she's like, we're about to go to dinner, so y'all go clean up and I'll see y'all at dinner. And so as we I just remember walking into the guest house and hearing behind me, you have 10 minutes, let's go. And I was like, what? Like, I just walked in, what are you talking about? And I think it was Luke. He's like, you have a flight out, pack up, you have 10 minutes to get out of here. And so I told the girls in my room and went and told the girls in the other room. We all got situated, they're good, we're packed, and I ran to KK's house to help her pack for real. So
and I know that it was sort of a wild, you got 10 minutes rushing through the city, and then you hurried up to then wait for a good deal of time. Just mentally, that whole day you've got 10 minutes through the waiting at the Italian embassy or military base actually, and then driving over to the actual airport. I mean, what's going through your mind? Dylan, we'll start with you. What just briefly, like, what are the emotions going in this?
Yeah, so we're being driven on small buses through Niamey with escorts and stuff. And in the moment, it's kind of like crazy and chaotic and wild. And one of the coolest conversations that I had with a student over the whole week or a whole couple of weeks happened on one of those bus rides from point A to point B. I was with Cassidy. She seemed upset, and I was like, hey, is everything okay? Because on one side there's another kid that's upset. He's upset just like kind of like Traci was, of like, I don't want to leave like this. Like, I don't want to leave super fast like this. And I'll get, it's okay. Well, then you check on this student, like, hey, are you okay? And she just had a story of how a family member, through everything that was happening with us, was basically reintroduced to church and like praying, and like, I mean, that's her story to tell, but it was one of those things that she was getting to celebrate something that's happening back home that the Lord was doing through what we're experiencing and through what we're doing. And so that, I remember that just sticks out to me, of like, we're going through this kind of seemingly chaotic situation, and yet the Lord is still moving in a variety of ways in our students and people related to us and stuff like that. And really, when we were sitting at the military base in the Catholic Church waiting, that's when it kind of was like, reflecting on everything that had just happened, and it really felt like we were in a movie, like not Rambo, like not guns blazing, like not that, but it just seemed like something you would see in like a realistic documentary of like, just getting out of a country. And so that was wild. The airport was crazy. I mean, there's a lot that I can talk about in those things, but that's kind of where my mindset was, is kind of like, this seems like something you would just watch, not something that you would actually experience.
Traci, what about you?
Yeah, for me, my first thought was, it actually happened. I mean, just that morning I was telling Ross, I cannot handle, you have 10 minutes to leave. And that's exactly what happened. And I don't know why I can't handle it, but I really couldn't. But I kept thinking it actually happened. And then I just kept thinking, what about KK? And what about the Phillips family? And what about the believers that are being left behind? And who's going to be here to minister to them and encourage them? And what about these people who've never heard the name of Jesus? How are they going to hear if the missionaries are having to leave? And really, those were my only two thoughts, is this is actually happening. I'm not in a movie, and what about them?
Yeah. So after all of the waiting, hurry up to wait, escorts, you finally get on a Italian military plane, sort of a cargo with seating sort of plane. And did they tell you where you were even going? You just get in a plane, it's like, we're going somewhere?
Rome,
I think somebody from here had texted me and said, "You're going to Rome."
Gotcha.
And that's the only time that I knew where we were going.
So you end up in Rome, and there was, in another episode we'll go into from our stateside perspective, that this was sort of by the request of our government, please don't make this known. We don't want to jeopardize the mission, all this kind of stuff. And so we weren't able to say anything until you guys landed in Rome and cleared sort of the Italian embassy and handed over to the U.S. embassy. But I want to just focus for just a second in Rome. I remember when we were sort of doing a planning meeting about all the stories related to this, that Traci, you talked about in Rome. I want you to tell this. Sort of, you were not in a great headspace to be in Rome, but through some circumstances, the Lord kind of used that to even teach you something else. Would you just share that story?
Yeah. It was the worst day of my year. I won't say life. It was top 10 for sure. Just being physically depleted and emotionally wrecked. It was very difficult. We came to a point, it was me and the girls were shopping, walking around. We had no money. We were walking around looking. And we didn't have money for something. I don't remember what it was, something that we needed. And we're all just defeated. We just kind of shrink down in our benches. And I said, this is what refugees feel like. They're in a country where they don't understand what's going on. They don't understand the language. They don't know how to get what they need. They might not have the resources that they need. Our phones were dying. We had no money. We were in our clothes from yesterday. Like, it was hungry. And so I was like, and I told the girls, like, remember this. Don't forget this feeling, so that when you see a homeless person or a refugee or somebody who's struggling, you can empathize with them, and you can know what that feels like. And you can minister to them better. And then I'm not exactly sure which one you're talking about, because then whenever we got home and I was telling my friend Kelly about how awful I felt the whole day, she said, how wonderful for you to study Philippians, end up in Rome where Paul wrote that letter, and probably feel and experience a lot of the things that he felt and experienced as far as your depletion and exhaustion and just mental state. And I thought, thank you, Kelly.
That's helped redeem that top 10 worst day.
Thank you, Lord. Maybe it's top 11.
Yeah, moved out of the top 10. Yeah. As we get ready to close out, one of the things that people have probably asked you, and one of the things people watching this may consider, is not necessarily just to Niger, though that's certainly on the table, but how has this impacted your willingness to go on mission? Like, probably people have asked you, would you go again if you knew that it was going to happen that way? Would you do it again? Would you, does this change how you feel? You might take students or lead others to go on mission. But for you, reflecting, we're a few months from this experience, how has this impacted your view of going on mission? Dylan, we'll start with you.
I mean, the easy answer is to say that it hasn't affected it. But there's something, Traci touched on this just a second ago, talking about the lostness that you see in a place like that, and the lostness that you feel when everybody who knows, that not everybody, a large portion of the people who know about Christ are leaving, like the people who are on mission there are leaving, and you start thinking about that, like, who's gonna tell them? Like, I mean, there are believers there, but whenever that becomes a reality, and you start to see, and like I said earlier, I've been in Niger 5 times. Every single time you feel it even more. You see it even more of, like, these people have to have somebody tell them. They have to know Christ, because they don't have anything else. And not that anything else would fill that gap, but they have to have it, because the overwhelming lostness just grips you. So I would say that during this trip, seeing that even further, being in the city even more, seeing the lifestyle people live, and seeing just if you're driving down the street there and you're looking around at all the people. I can't remember if it was Mark or Ross said something about this, but 99.7% of the people that you are walking around, that you are driving around, that you're seeing, that are looking at you whenever you're passing them on the road or whatever it is, 99.7 or something like that % of those people are going to die without knowing Christ. That hits home in a way there's just heaviness there, and there's hurt. I mean, there's just honestly hurt. And so that becoming more real, and then thinking about that being the reality as a large portion of believers are leaving, really makes me feel like, no, that there's even more of a reason now to say, hey, look, I've seen darkness. Our kids have experienced this darkness. Why would we shy any of them away from wanting to invest light into that darkness? Because the reality of it is, there's places all around the world, whether it's Niger, whether it's somewhere that's relatively safer, people need the gospel everywhere. And, our kids, we try to teach our kids, like, you have to live a life that's on mission. Like, you always have to be sharing your faith. You have to be proclaiming the gospel. But if a student, middle school, high school, whatever it is drawn to do missions, I'm not going to be the person that stands in the way of someone's calling like that. Like, I would like to be someone who helps, helps guide or helps kids explore that calling. And so, I mean, for me, if anything, my passion personally for missions, it's either stayed the same or gotten stronger. For kids wanting to go, it's probably gotten stronger, because and probably on one of these episodes, kids are going to say this, but if you ask them if they'll go back to Niger today, all of them will say yes. And it's not because they had a lot of fun, because like we talked about, there was a lot of times that weren't fun, but it's because they grew. They saw God work in the lives of kids and adults and the church overseas. And so seeing them grow in a less than ideal trip is just like, man, if kids can grow a desire for the Lord and missions on that trip, they can do it on any trip, right? And so I would say yes, 100%. I would take kids on trips. I will go back to Niger at some point. I don't know when that'll be, but I'm not scared of it. There's a need there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if that answers your question,
it does. Traci, how about you? How has this impacted your view of the call to go?
Yeah. All I can think in this moment is when we were reading through Philippians about the middle of the first chapter, Paul says, this has happened to me for the advancement of the gospel, because now the whole imperial guard has heard. Maybe they've come to know, I can't remember. But the point is, his imprisonment brought glory to the Lord. And God in his sovereignty took care of him in that prison, took care of him on all of his missionary journeys. God in his sovereignty took care of us on that trip. He knew we were going to get stuck in that queue the day that we left. He knew we were going to get stuck in that queue a month before, when I thought, I have to get school supplies now. And because I was not able to do that. God in his sovereignty knows all of the details. And so if we feel called to go, we just have to go, because that's our safest place, is in his will, in his plan for us. And we can know that even if we get stuck in prison or in a coup, that it is for the advancement of the gospel. How many people have heard about God and the cool things that he's done because we were stuck there? So don't be scared of the unknown, is what I would say. If you feel called, go. That would be one amazing adventure. And yeah, I'm going back to Niger as soon as I can.
Yeah. Guys, I really appreciate your time today, but also your leadership and your willingness to be obedient, to go and lead students. And I am so thankful to the Lord that he was gracious enough to bring you all back safely with a renewed passion for Niger and for the nations. And so thank you for listening in on our conversation. I appreciate you watching this Harvest podcast, a missions podcast of Harmony Hill. If you could like, share, subscribe, all those things to help us beat the algorithm so more people can hear the story of what God has done through this Niger mission team. And we look forward to seeing you the next time you're on the Hill.